All right, welcome back, everybody. I am Daren Blonski with Sonoma Wealth Advisors. I have joining me today in another episode of Sonoma Brain Trust, Chelsie Runnings with Better Home and Gardens. I've got Mary Piasta with Haeuser, Valluzzo, and Piasta, and we also have a special guest today, and it's Lori. Excuse me if I messed up the last name. Is it LoriBeth, your first name, or is it LoriBeth? And she is an expert on Prop 19 stuff, and this is going to be a big deal for us. We're seeing a lot of this coming up in the news. We're getting approached by a lot of clients asking about what they do now that Prop 19 has passed. For those who don't know, it's basically dealing with the taxation of property, and that has impacts in the estate planning process. We've also got big news with COVID-19. Obviously, cases are spiking pretty heavily, and we've got some closures. We're going to focus on Prop 19 today. We'll talk about COVID-19 a little bit too, but I think everyone's a bit exhausted on that one at this point, and we know what the game is. So without further ado, let's dive in. So Mary, tell us, Prop 19, what are we dealing with? What are we looking at, and where are we headed?
Right, so Prop 19 is a huge issue for estate plans, as you said. It's a big deal with respect to folks with real estate issues. And on my staff here, I have a specialist, Beth Merrill. She's a law school graduate. She also has worked extensively in county offices on change of ownership issues. And so instead of me take the spotlight on this, I'm going to let you guys hear from the expert about this particular issue. So LoriBeth.
Hello, everybody, and good morning out there. So just kind of a big, broad brush stroke history, and then we can delve into more specifics. We enjoy here in the state of California the Proposition 13, which was started in 1978 by the Jarvis-Gann Initiative. And then around 10 years later, they also put in exclusions and exemptions so that you could maintain your Prop 13 base year value. And of course, property values do go up a little bit every year, at least 1%. However, everybody is very protective of keeping these base year values. And one of the ways in which we've been able to maintain those base year values is generationally passing property from parents to children, and in some limited instances from grandparents to grandchildren. With the Proposition 19 that passed by a very narrow margin, only 51%, it actually required a constitutional amendment to the California Constitution. And it was not full disclosure. I don't think people really realized what the impacts were going to be. Due to Proposition 19, it was kind of parlayed as, oh, it's going to help fire victims, it's going to help raise the tax base to cover all these wildfires in California. 75% is going directly there. And while all these are good things, because the proposition will become law as of February 16th, 2021, everybody's kind of scrambling to try to understand specifically what the impacts are, and can they still pass on to their children without losing their Prop 13 tax base value as in times past. And again, unfortunately, the proposition wasn't really forthcoming. It kind of said, oh, people who are older and disabled and victims of disaster can transfer their base. But in reality, that was already true, although it will be a little more expansive, and people can, especially older folks, can go to more than just like the 10 counties that have reciprocity. They'll be able to take their downsizing tax base to other counties, and also even if they want to buy something a little more expensive, they can, only have to undergo a partial reassessment. So if there's any specific questions about the difference perhaps between commercial properties or personal residences and what would actually qualify and how to navigate through this Prop 19. I'm certainly willing to answer the question.
Yeah, so LoriBeth, one of the questions I've gotten already from multiple clients is they've been approached by attorneys, and the attorneys are saying, look, if you want to preserve your tax basis now, meaning the rate at which the parents are being taxed at versus what the children will potentially be taxed at by once upon death of the parent and it's transferred to the child, what the new law says is that tax will basically get adjusted for the death or for the valuation of the property now. And one of the recommendations that I keep hearing from attorneys is that, oh, you should transfer the property now if you never plan to sell it, because then you can preserve the tax rate. And the kind of pushback I've had with that is, well, yeah, but then you're giving up the step up at basis and death. So it's kind of a rob Peter to pay Paul kind of situation if you ever sell the property. And so I'm curious, I mean, is that in fact true? One, that if a client were to transfer the property now from the owner to the child, the parent to the child, that preserves the current tax rate. And secondly, are they in fact giving up that basis step up?
Okay, so that's a great question, Daren. So because the deadline is fast approaching, you do want to transfer the property if you want to preserve the tax basis. But we also have to keep in mind that residential is different than commercial properties in terms of tax ramifications. So for instance, if you went ahead and you transferred now and you could preserve the tax basis does have its own limitations. So meaning there's an assessed value, and when you look at your tax bill, that is going to be the amount that was set when your property was initially acquired, plus all the increases over the years under Prop 13, like I said, at least 1% in any voter bonds and special assessment districts, which may or may not be on a percentage basis. So if you bought a property, say 10 years ago for $100,000, the assessed value may be only like $125,000, but market value may be, $500,000. So obviously there's a lot of motivation to preserve the tax basis there. The problem is that if you don't do it now, okay, and you wait till after the deadline has passed, that it becomes problematic, because you need to, the parent, it has to be their primary residence, okay? And there are ways to prove that it's primary residence. The most common way is you will have a homeowner's exemption on the property, which will exempt the first $7,000 of value, which only translates to a $70 savings. However, it's good evidentiary to say, yes, this is my primary residence. Okay, so if you wait till after the deadline, it has to be the primary residence of the parents or grandparents, and it also has to be the primary residence of the child as well. And the only way to legitimately prove that is to have the child move into the house. So obviously that's huge, and most people aren't going to be moving in with their parents because it's unlikely their parents are going to be moving physically out of the house in such a short amount of time. So it really require you to move in to your parents' primary residence and then transfer the homeowner's exemption to yourself after the deadline. So it would be a lot easier to do it beforehand. But again, that's just as far as the residential piece goes. And to get to the part two of your question about the step up in basis, you would really need to consult with your tax, professional, CPA, or your legal professional, because even though you might not enjoy the step up in basis, as you say, you're still enjoying that super low tax basis by being able to preserve it, by getting this property from your parents.
My read on the law is, and this is just my read, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a tax professional, I'm a certified financial planner. So my job is to help clients do the planning piece of this and kind of assimilate all this information. And my read on the situation, though, is while you might be saving a lot of money in taxes, if you ever sell that property, you're potentially creating a much larger tax obligation for yourself, because you're effectively removing the ability for that property. Let's say if the basis is currently is $100,000, but it's actually worth 1.5 million, and you transfer that property now to your child, and that child has to sell the property for whatever reason at some point in their life, that basis, from what I understand, is still at 100 grand. It's not 1.5 million. And so that difference.
Agreed, Daren. But there's two thoughts that need to go into this before people just panic and start transferring property. A lot of parents, this is a very good way, because California real estate is so high, to help their child obtain the dream of home ownership. And so you really have to commit to this, that, I am passing on this legacy house to you, and you will be occupying it as your primary residence. So, that way you're going to avoid those capital gains. But then too, of course, if there is that much capital gains, you have to weigh it. If you're getting a house for $100,000, and then you need to you're going to sell it for that much, you just have to weigh it out if that's the right move for you. I mean, without specifics and really looking into that property and the goals, it's impossible to know specifically what is going to be the proper move for that individual.
Yeah, I think you're right on. And I think from my assessment of the situation is, if you are committed to never selling that property, this approach could work, where you transfer the house now. If you're not sure, you're potentially putting yourself in a jeopardizing financial situation, because you're basically locking in the fact that you're going to ultimately have a huge gain on that piece of property if you ever do sell it.
Right. And this also applies, to some farms, those types of going concerns, where people, again, have had these houses for generations. So you really need to check in with your legal professional, your tax professional, and see what the goals are, and see precisely in the given situation what the ramifications are going to be in your situation.
In my analysis and looking at it, and correct me if I'm incorrect in this, LoriBeth or Lori? Do you prefer one?
It's 2 names, 1 girl.
2 names, 1 girl. Got it. So you take whatever the assessed value of the property is, and you multiply it by 1.25%, right? That's on a residential property. And that gives you your prospective new tax rate upon transfer. And you compare the difference between where you're at currently times what the normalized assessed value would be times 1.25%. And that's roughly how you would look at that, the differentiation in taxes.
I'm not quite tracking with you, Daren. So everybody's tax rate is 1%. And then
Right.
there are other taxes onto that. And, if you're just looking for a quick way to figure out, what your tax rate would be, you might use that, but I would really caution you, and again, look directly at the specific tax bill for that specific parcel, because some are percentage based, but some are flat fee. So
Got it. That's great advice. Thank you. I think that's really important. And I think that's the key. When I'm hearing of this, it's about doing the assessment of what's the true impact on the tax side, and then comparing that with what's the true impact of not having a capital gain step up should you have to sell that property.
Correct.
And then on top of that, what's your overall financial situation look like? What's your income look like? So there's a lot of moving parts, and my goodness, a lot of Californians are going to get caught off guard with this one.
Yeah, because unfortunately, again, unless you're ready to make that your primary residence, it's going to be difficult because sometimes the properties that parents want to pass on are not the primary residence. They're rental properties, they're second homes. So those are not going to qualify anyways. So, and that's going to spike the rental rates because they're going to get reassessed, and the mom and pop owned houses with the low tax, they're not going to be able to pass those on. And so, they're going to have to recoup the increase in the taxes by getting reassessed with raising rents. Did you have a question, Chelsie?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate something you had said in the beginning. So in order to transfer the property and keep the tax basis, that original property has to be mom and dad's primary residence. It cannot be one of their investment properties.
Correct. And so there's going to really be a disparity in the impacts of the types of properties that can get transferred. What happens on the other end? Again, I just mentioned, not being able to transfer those commercial properties and getting those reassessed is really going to affect the rental market at the same time when you're having COVID legislation where you can't evict and you have to take a 75% reduction, and the only way you can recoup is through small claims, and it's kind of a perfect storm. So I don't think that the timing on this is well timed, and I think each of these pieces of legislation is not complementary.
I'm thinking back to my paralegal time when I was doing estate planning and probate, and I'm just remembering all the families who passed on just like 4 or 5 or 6 properties to their kids, and their kids just got all those properties, and the kids didn't even live around here. Their mom and dad lived in Sonoma, and the kids had, moved away and raised their families somewhere else. And now I'm thinking, what would those families have done last year if this had come around and they had all these properties that now they had to just either sell or figure out what else to do because their kids weren't going to be able to just take those properties anymore and make the decision. And I talked to so many people.
And I think people are going to start, especially law firms, and that's why you want to consult with them. I think they're going to get extremely creative in the way they're titling the properties. And, it might go more towards legal entity types of ownerships to legally avoid reassessments. And so anybody considering the impacts of, their properties, commercial or residences, second homes, rentals, etc., needs to come in and have a very heart-to-heart talk about what their goals are for their legacy properties and avoiding tax impacts.
I think really the crux of it all comes down to, are you going to get rid of this property or not? And if there's the inclination you're going to get rid of it, that changes the decision. If you're definitely never under any circumstances going to get rid of it, which I think is pretty hard for anybody to say, then it's door A or door B, and you got to make that decision. And unfortunately now it's forcing a lot of people who are older. In one case, I was dealing with a client this week, and he's 102 years old, having to make this decision on to transfer 2 rental properties to his daughters, and then transfer and how they're going to deal with their primary residence, and what are the tax implications. And I think you bring up an incredible point. I mean, the timing of this thing could not be worse, given that we have a moratorium on foreclosures. We have a moratorium on ability to file an unlawful detainer case and kick someone out who's not paying rent. But you have landlords who can't now increase rent, which they'll need to do if taxes step up. In some cases, in 2 of these houses I was looking at this week, it's going to be easily $1,000 a month additional that they'll either have to pass through the renters or they're going to have to take that tax burden themselves. So real implications here for people who are land owners or own rentals. You have to talk with your attorney and at least make the decision, or your CPA, and make the decision prior. And it's February 21st, I believe, that's that cutoff, right?
February 16th, 2021.
2021. So February 16th. So super important to make some decisions here in a time when nobody wants to make decisions because we're all hunkering down again. So, wow, lots of info, lots of new changes. And once again, the proposition policy or approach to governing in California hit it all out of the park with another law that makes zero sense once it's actually applied and creates all kinds of complexity for us.
Right. I mean, obviously the winners and the big backers of the proposition was, the realtors, and it does create a lot of opportunity there because people will probably opt to just sell rather than try to transfer it through all these different avenues. It does level the playing field for outside investors to, have an opportunity, and it's going to create a lot of, continue to create a lot of real estate business and transactions.
Which will just ramp up a market that's already ramped up, right? And Chelsie, you know a ton about that. We've talked a lot about what's going on.
Yeah, I was just thinking one bright spot maybe out of this proposition, and LoriBeth, please correct me if I'm wrong on this at all, but would be for the 55 and over, for somebody who's living in a 2-story and their spouse has passed away and they want to downsize, but they don't want to lose that tax value that they've had for all these years. They can now take that tax basis and move to anywhere within California to a new residence.
It has considerably expanded the counties that they can go to. There was always some options. And so I don't think the public generally understood that there were at least around, 10 counties you could go to. And each county has different reciprocity counties. And also to Chelsie, another benefit is you had to select something with the same or less market value if you were 55 years or older. But now you could actually select something with the same or more market value, and only the overage would get reassessed. So that's kind of an advantage, even though they call it downsizing. Sometimes market prices, depending if you go to a more spendy area, you would need to buy something a little more expensive than what you sold. So at least you get to keep that amount and transfer that base over, and then only the differences between the two market values would actually get reassessed.
This sounds really painful.
Well, that's why we're here, to help mitigate the pain.
That's right. And I think in the short run, I think it will definitely put some landlords in a pinch this year. They're going to have to figure that out, or in 2021, I should say. Well, I think we leave it there. For those who are interested in market updates, we do a live on the markets every Friday with Sonoma Wealth Advisors. You can find us just searching YouTube, Sonoma Wealth Advisors, and you can get a long, in-depth view on what's going on in the charts as my partner and I, Chris, nerd out. Mary, anything you've got before we close it?
Just that there'll be some upcoming COVID regulations coming out in California. So to check back with us next week, and we'll have updates on those.
Sounds great. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.